Chapter 21. Treating of a professor's public endorsement and the inspiring words of a renowned author. The library beckoned. Carrie returned to the two-story cathedral of silence, feeling the tensions of her lunch. That decision, her deliberate embrace of whatever this was becoming, receded with each step she took deeper into the hushed space. She paused just inside the entrance, taking in the familiar scene. Leather-bound volumes waiting patiently on gleaming shelves, offering refuge from messy emotions and complicated entanglements. Yet this time, the room felt different. Her eyes drifted automatically to the secluded alcove where she'd first seen Crispin Shrike without his academic armour. Curled in a wing-backed chair, lost in a first edition of Pride and Prejudice, his face transformed by genuine passion. The spot where they'd scrambled together on hands and knees after the power cut, searching for the dropped book. The place where his hand had covered hers in the darkness, sending that jolt of unexpected connection through her fingers. She moved between the shelves, reading titles at random, her camera remaining in its bag. A different mission drove her now. Fiction. S. Her fingers traced the alphabetized spines. Sharp, Shatner, Shelley. And there he was. Shrike, Crispin. 3 titles stood shoulder to shoulder. She selected the most recent, Trafalgar Tide. The cover featured a dramatic oil painting of ships locked in battle, all smoke and fury. She turned it over. His author photograph was on the back flap. A black and white portrait that was professionally competent, but failed utterly to capture the man she now knew. The photographer had posed him against a neutral background. His expression serious and profound, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the camera, as if contemplating the weighty matters of history. Nothing like the way he'd leaned toward her on his balcony this morning, sleeves rolled up, eyes dancing as he'd rambled enthusiastically about ABBA lyrics. It was remarkable how a professional portrait could so completely miss the essence of its subject.
Just the one?
The librarian asked as Carrie presented the book. Her voice was a well-bred whisper. Carrie wondered if this was the same stern guardian who'd watched Crispin like a hawk with the Jane Austen first edition. Just the one for now, Carrie replied, her own voice dropping to match the room's hushed tone. Back in the solitude of her cabin, she kicked off her shoes and curled up on the small sofa. The ship moved with a gentle, almost imperceptible sway. The coastline of Tasmania, a distant green and grey line on the horizon. She opened the book, curious about what she'd find. Would his writing be as formal and academic as his lecture had suggested? As rigid and fact-focused as his author photo implied? Or would there be glimpses of the man who'd seen through her question to the heart of himself? She began to read. An hour later, she looked up, surprised to find she was nearly 50 pages in. Her coffee sat cold and forgotten on the side table. She'd been utterly transported to the gun decks of HMS Victory, feeling the roll of the ship, hearing the creak of timbers, smelling the acrid mixture of gunpowder and sweat and fear. She hadn't expected this. The research was clearly immense, a whole world of naval tradition and 18th century life rendered with breathtaking detail, but the characters breathed. A young midshipman, terrified and homesick, wrote letters to his mother that he knew might never reach her. An aging captain, weary of war, stared at a miniature portrait of his long-dead wife each night before sleep. One passage in particular had caught her.
Sarah stood at the window of her small Portsmouth lodging, watching the grey waves beyond the harbour. 6 months since James had sailed. 6 months of looking for his handwriting among the letters delivered to the boarding house. The landlady had stopped giving her sympathetic glances weeks ago. Now there was only the silent understanding that passes between women who know what it is to wait for men who might never return.
She pressed her palm against the cold glass. Sometimes she imagined she could feel the same sea spray that touched his face, as if the water carried some essence of him back to her, across the unforgiving leagues. Crispin hadn't just reported the facts. He'd found the emotional heart inside them, the part he'd claimed to be struggling with in his new book. And yet, It was clearly there in his previous work, this deep, intuitive understanding of human longing. Suddenly, she understood him better. The public intellectual, the meticulous historian, and the man who felt the quiet desperation of people dead for 200 years were not separate entities. They were all him, a complex, contradictory whole. And the thought, instead of grounding her, sent a fresh wave of something dangerously close to tenderness through her. She checked her watch and startled. It was nearly 3. She'd been so absorbed that she'd lost track of time. The workshop with Maeve Penhaligon would be starting any minute. She reluctantly closed the book, running her fingers over the cover one last time. She'd have to finish it later. For now, she had a more immediate connection with its author waiting for her. As she grabbed her bag and headed for the door, a knot of anticipation formed in her stomach. The workshop would be their first public appearance together since their connection had transformed into something intimate. How would they navigate this? Would he introduce her to others? Would she sit beside him, revealing their connection to curious observers? The possibilities made her pulse quicken. The chart room was unrecognisable. For Crispin's talk, it had been a half-empty hall of polite interest. Now it was packed solid, a humming, electric hive of energy. Every seat was taken. He'd mentioned Maeve Penhaligon was popular, but this was something else. A prickle of anxiety ran up her arms. This was far more public than she had anticipated. She scanned the crowd, her photographer's instincts kicking in, cataloguing faces, expressions, groupings. The lens through which she viewed the world automatically composed the scene. Anticipation in blue and gold, she'd caption it, capturing the mix of excitement and nervousness on the attendees' faces, all framed by the chart room's elegant maritime decor. Then she saw him. Crispin, near the front, had spotted her and was waving discreetly. The seat beside him was empty. He'd saved it for her. A middle-aged woman in the row behind him noticed the exchange and nudged her companion, their eyes following Carrie with open curiosity. So it begins, she thought. She squeezed past knees and tote bags, murmuring apologies. He smiled as she sat, a private, conspiratorial expression that was both thrilling and terrifying. "This is a lot more public than I expected," she whispered, her voice tight. The proximity of so many people made their intimacy feel suddenly exposed. He didn't answer immediately, just looked at her, his expression calm and steady.
Trust me, Carrie.
He said, his voice low but confident. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement of fact. Before she could form a reply, a ripple of applause went through the room. Maeve Penhaligon strode onto the small stage, radiating an energy that filled the space instantly. She was dressed in stylishly casual clothes, a bright scarf knotted at her neck, her smile wide and genuine.
"Hello, everyone,"
she began, her voice warm and direct, quintessentially New Zealand.
"Look at this mob. A captive audience in the best possible way. I'm Maeve, and for the next hour or so, we're going to talk about the one thing I know you're all thinking about, writing your bestseller.
A laugh went through the room.
Now, I've written a book on this, Write the Next Bestseller, available in all good bookshops, including the one on board, shameless plug over, and it's full of tips and tricks, but the most important piece of advice is this.
She leaned forward, her expression becoming serious.
Don't dabble. Commit. Every single person in this room has a book inside them. Everyone. The only difference between an aspiring writer and a published one is that the published one sat their bum in a chair and finished the manuscript.
She paused, letting the words sink in.
I didn't start writing until I was 40. I was in teaching, had a mortgage, a husband, a life. But I had a story that wouldn't leave me alone, so I committed.
40. The number landed in Carrie's mind with a sudden, heavy thud. Her own age, more or less. An age she'd thought of as a midpoint, a time for consolidating. not for starting something new. Yet here was Maeve, testament to the possibility of reinvention. A path began to materialise in Carrie's mind. Her photography career felt established, but with her mother's increasing needs, the constant travel was becoming impossible. She'd been seeing this as an ending, a constraint, a painful closing of options. But what if it was something else? A writer didn't need to chase the light around the globe. A writer could work from a quiet room, from a house where an ailing mother could be cared for, from a life that stayed in one place. The possibility of it bloomed in her mind, a different kind of creativity, but one that might preserve her sanity, her independence, her soul.
Right.
Maeve said, clapping her hands together.
First, let's go around the room. I want to hear what you're burning to write. Just a sentence or two. Don't be shy. You, sir, in the front row. What's your name and what's your book about?
The workshop moved quickly. People spoke of family histories, crime thrillers, epic romances. A woman 2 rows ahead described a children's picture book about Australian wildlife. An elderly gentleman talked about memorialising his time as a diplomat in Southeast Asia. When it was Crispin's turn, he stood.
Crispin Shrike.
He said, his voice carrying easily.
I'm working on a historical book about the Victorian photographer Letitia Cameron.
He then turned, gesturing towards Carrie.
And I've had the great fortune to meet a modern-day lady photographer on this cruise, a woman who tells the most extraordinary stories with her camera, who understands instinctively how to find the character in a landscape, the narrative in a portrait, and you know what?
He looked around the room, his eyes shining with an utterly genuine conviction.
She has more potential to write a book, a best-selling book about anything in the world, than anybody in this room or on this ship.
The room's focus shifted to her, dozens of eyes adjusting their aperture to take in this unexpected subject. Heat flooded her neck and face, and she fought the sudden, fierce urge to shrink in her seat. The public praise was embarrassing, but she also recognised with a sharp intake of breath what he was doing, staking his professional reputation on her, a woman he barely knew. This wasn't just a compliment. It was an act of faith that bordered on recklessness. And yet, a thought, sparked by his words, took root and began to grow. A book, not of photographs, but of stories. The stories behind the photographs. The people she'd met. That young black lawyer in New Mexico, fighting for water rights against impossible odds. The formidable female travel guide in Iran, navigating a complex society with wit and courage. Dozens of others. Their stories were all there, living in her memory, her notebooks, the metadata of her image files. When a woman from the row behind nudged her, Carrie realised it was her turn. She stood, her legs feeling unsteady. I'm Carrie Watson, she began, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. I'm a photographer. I've published books of photographs. But I've met so many incredible people on my travels. Maybe the book is about them. Their stories. She sat down, her heart hammering. Crispin gave her a subtle, encouraging nod.
Beauty!
Maeve exclaimed.
We've got a real ripper of an idea there. Pictures and stories together, that's a double whammy for the reader. Brilliant!
As the introductions continued around the room, Maeve moved energetically across the stage, giving encouragement and brief feedback to each person. When everyone had spoken, she clasped her hands together.
Right, you lot. Now for the next bit, the hard yakka.
She motioned to the ship's staff, who began handing out branded notepads and pens.
3 sentences. That's all you get. 1. Describe the book inside you. 2. What's the biggest obstacle stopping you from writing it? 3. How are you going to overcome it?
A studious silence fell over the room as everyone bent to the task. Carrie wrote quickly, the answers suddenly clear. 1. A travelogue of portraits, both photographic and written, of the extraordinary, ordinary people I've met around the world. 2. My obstacle is that I see the world in images, and I've never written anything longer than a caption. 3. I don't know. She looked at the last sentence, feeling a familiar sense of deflation. She didn't know, and she had a greater obstacle than she'd written. Her mother's care meant she was becoming tethered to one place, her wings clipped. But perhaps that was actually an opportunity for a different kind of creativity.
All right, time's up.
Maeve announced.
Let's hear what you've got. Let's work through the alphabet this time. Anyone have a name starting with A? First name or last, doesn't matter. Stick your hand in the air. You, madam, in the gorgeous flowered blouse.
People began to read their sentences aloud. Some were funny, some poignant. A woman in her 70s wanted to write a romance novel, but was worried her children would be horrified. A young man was working on a fantasy epic, but feared it was too derivative. When it was Crispin's turn, he spoke with newfound clarity.
My book tells the story of Letitia Cameron's fierce artistic passion. My obstacle was that I was strangling her story with my own rigid adherence to facts. My solution is to trust the emotional truth of her story, a realization I owe almost entirely to my photographer friend Carrie.
He looked directly at her, and in that public declaration, the entire room seemed to shift into a new dimension. This was more than a fling. This was a creative conspiracy. He was acknowledging not just their connection, but the impact she'd had on his work, his thinking. Something deep in her heart unlocked, a feeling that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. When her turn came, she read her first 2 sentences, but when she got to the third, she simply said, "I haven't figured that part out yet."
Honest? I like it.
Maeve said with a grin.
But let me tell you a secret. You don't need to be thinking about a problem all the time to solve it. In fact, it's better if you don't. The back of your brain is smarter than you are. The answer will come while you're asleep, or in the shower, or trying to figure out the cryptic crossword. Your job is to feed it the information, then get out of the way.
She spread her hands wide.
Story is king. Nothing takes precedence over feeding the story to the reader. And you, my dear, have stories to tell. I can see it. Your photographer's eye has been capturing them for years. Now you just need to let them out in a different medium.
Carrie felt a profound sense of recognition. That was exactly how she worked as a photographer. The long periods of waiting, of observing, of letting the world arrange itself until the perfect shot revealed itself. She would wait hours for the right light, the right expression, the right moment. Perhaps writing wasn't so different after all. It was in that moment she understood. Crispin hadn't just invited her here. He had engineered this entire experience, using Maeve's practical, empowering wisdom as a tool to help her see what he already saw in her. Their conversation on his balcony, about leaving space for the viewer, about the emotional truth beyond the facts. It all connected to this moment. He'd seen in her not just a lover or a kindred spirit, but a storyteller who hadn't yet found her voice. It was the most thoughtful, most extraordinary gift anyone had ever given her. As Maeve wrapped up the session with a final round of advice about discipline and routine, Carrie felt something shifting inside her, like tectonic plates realigning. The change was subtle, but profound.
Remember,
Maeve said, her voice carrying over the buzz of conversation that had begun to fill the room.
discipline is the magic ingredient. Establish a routine that works for you and stick to it religiously. Treat writing as a professional commitment, not just a hobby.
Carrie stood, a surge of energy making her feel lightheaded. "I'm going to do it," she announced, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. "I'm going to start writing as soon as I can." The workshop applauded, and she saw Crispin beaming, his face alight with a pride that was fierce and unguarded.
That's the spirit.
Maeve laughed.
But here's my last tip, and it might seem like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. Don't start tonight. Don't even start tomorrow. Sleep on it for a few nights. Let the ideas arrange themselves. Get it right to start with, and you'll keep getting it right. And you'll know. Trust me. You'll know when it's the right moment to start. Just think about it out of the corners of your mind.
The advice landed like a blessed relief, tempering her manic energy with a dose of calm purpose. That was exactly how she worked as a photographer. The long periods of waiting, of observing, of letting the world arrange itself until the perfect shot revealed itself. She didn't have to do it all right now. She just had to let the idea live, to nurture it. And when she returned to Sydney, to the small apartment she shared with her mother, she would find a way to make it work. A desk by a window, perhaps. Morning hours while her mother slept. A new routine to replace the travel she could no longer undertake. As the crowd began to disperse, Crispin caught her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a simple, public gesture of possession that sent a current of pure, unadulterated shock straight through her. In all their intimacy, this was actually the first time they'd held hands in front of others. His palm was warm against hers, his fingers slightly rough at the tips from, she imagined, turning pages and taking notes.
See?
He murmured, his eyes full of that same pride.
I told you to trust me.
You engineered this whole thing, she said. Not a question, but a realization. You knew exactly what would happen.
I had hopes.
He admitted.
I could see it in you from the moment you asked me that question in my lecture. The way you speak, the way you see the world. You're already a writer, Carrie. You just haven't put the words on paper yet.
She shook her head, overwhelmed by the depth of his belief in her. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing something I didn't. His eyes softened, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her, right there in the crowded chart room. Instead, he squeezed her hand.
I'll see you tonight,
He said.
for dinner. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. You're going to need it.
With that cryptic statement, he released her hand and moved away, stopping to speak with Maeve. Carrie watched him go, still feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the echo of his words in her mind. Tonight, the formal dinner in the steakhouse restaurant, their public debut in a way. The thought sent a flutter of fresh anxiety through her, not of exposure but of anticipation. It was different now. Less about being judged for her dress or being the subject of gossip, and more about stepping fully into this strange new world they were creating together, one that might extend beyond the boundaries of the cruise itself. She made her way out of the chart room, clutching Maeve's notepad and pen like talismans. The afternoon stretched ahead, hours to prepare for the evening. But first, she wanted to return to her cabin and finish reading Crispin's book. She wanted to know more of the man who had somehow, impossibly, begun to know her.